For those of you who know me from the radio, this is what I look like. Get used to it.
The AMT.
Welcome to the first ever Brian Lehrer Live. We'll be here every Wednesday night at 7, all through May and June. We're here to hang out together, exchange ideas about life and politics, have some fun along the way, I hope, and try to look for some truth in our crazy, mixed-up world. Thanks for checking us out. I have here yesterday's New York Times, page B5, Bicyclists' Convention Arrest is Undercut by a Videotape. Now, this is not the first time. In fact, the Times reports that some 400 people arrested during the Republican convention here in New York last summer have now gotten off because video evidence undermined their convention arrests. But these are basically homemade videos. Citizen journalists during the Republican convention here last summer who were watching the cops watch them to make sure there was no brutality or made-up charges. Well, the videos do seem to show that hundreds of people were arrested and charged for no good reason. And tonight, we will launch this brand new television series by showing you some of that video and taking your phone calls on what it means. So get ready to call in to 212-251-0801. And then, American icon Bill Cosby is the target of a new book that takes aim at the renowned comedian for remarks he made a year ago dissing the values of inner-city blacks while a mostly black audience at an NAACP dinner laughed and cheered. We will meet the author who talks back to Bill Cosby, that's Michael Eric Dyson, who calls himself a hip-hop intellectual. And we'll have a call-in on the question, should all of New York's undocumented immigrants be allowed to stay here legally? But first, about those convention videos. We have two guests who will walk us through some of this footage and talk about what it means. They are Jeffrey Rothman from the National Lawyers Guild, New York City chapter, which is using these videos to defend the accused protesters, and blogger Jeff Jarvis, who is all about using the media to expand democracy on his blog, which is buzzmachine.com. Great to have both of you as our first ever guests on Brian Lehrer Live.
Great to be here. Congratulations, Brian.
Thank you. And Jeffrey Rothman, let me start right with you, and I want to set up these videos that we're going to show our audience in just a second, but first give our viewers a little bit of background. Did the National Lawyers Guild set out to, in effect, arm an army of people to watch the police, watch them?
There was an organization named Eyewitness Video who has been filming the police at various protests for quite some time now, but never on the scale that was employed during the RNC. And so Eyewitness Video approached the National Lawyers Guild, and they worked together to train people to go out and film at the different demonstrations, and also put out a call afterwards to have amateur videographers send in the footage that they had taken on their own.
And so, as we will see, there are some individual cases, and in one case, a mass group of more than 200 people who've been cleared as a result of these videos. Let's set up this first video. This first one, first of all, comes to us courtesy of Tatiana Einat, a documentarian from a forthcoming documentary called Profiles in Protest. And this is about, this is video footage from the Republican National Convention. As you'll see, it takes place at the New York Public Library, main branch, the plaza with the lions and all of that. And the defendant here is a man named Dennis Kine. Now set this up for us a little bit, Jeffrey. We will see that Dennis Kine is not a happy man. He's a pretty belligerent man. But tell our viewers what they're about to see.
Dennis Kine was not a happy man on the day in question, and was saying some things that were fairly animated. But what Dennis Kine did not do are the things that the officer who claims to have arrested him said that he did at trial on the witness stand. At trial, a police officer, Wohl, testified that Dennis Kine would not disperse and had to be arrested and carried kicking and writhing down the steps of the public library and taken off to a police van. what you'll see in the video is Dennis Kine making very animated statements, but walking of his own volition down the stairs, then being handcuffed while he's on his knees. You'll see him on his knees, having been handcuffed, saying again and again, "I am not resisting, I am not resisting."
Okay, and you'll hear him hurling some obscenities, which we bleeped.
Otherwise, you'd have problems with the FCC, but...
Otherwise, we would have problems with the FCC, even though this is cable. But he's later charged with inciting a riot and resisting arrest, and the video appears to show that he's doing neither of those things, and in fact, the charges have been dropped. The first words you'll hear are a police officer telling people to clear the plaza. Let's roll the tape. So you hear that, you will be arrested, you're blocking pedestrian traffic, arrested if you don't clear the plaza. Now we're not seeing Dennis Kine yet, we'll see him in a minute wearing a camouflage shirt.
That's Mr. Kine right there with the backside.
And he's talking to the police officer, but he's not touching anybody. Let's listen.
Nazi! You Nazi! You Nazis! You're Nazis! You Nazis! You're all Nazis!
Walking of his own down the steps. Another comment on the way.
Not a happy man. I would be wary if I was a police officer at this point. He gets pushed a little bit.
Little show.
Walk the steps this way, please.
There we see some other people for a minute who are not really the subject of this conversation. There's another man on the ground here in this unedited video being arrested. This is not Mr. Kine. This is irrelevant to our story. But we will see and hear Mr. Kine in a minute on his knees saying, "I'm not resisting, I'm not resisting."
Look for an officer in a white shirt saying, pointing, saying he resisted. Him.
To me, relax.
Resisting.
Yeah.
I got it. Yes, sir.
I am not resisting. I am not resisting. Listen.
Okay.
Please step back. Step back, please. I'm not resisting. You gotta get over. Listen, you guys are blocking the street. You can't do that.
One minute. We'll carry him and get him out. We're blocking the steps. Bring him. He's going right to my wagon in the back. Just inform whoever you're giving it.
And that's the end of that tape. I think that's the first time that as much of that has been shown on television as we just saw. And, you know, I have to say in honesty, we did not see the moment of his arrest. We don't know if there was a brief moment in which he was resisting before he wound up on his knees like that, correct?
Well, from that tape, you did not see the actual moment of his arrest, but the important thing is what was testified to by Officer Wall on the witness stand, which is that he himself was involved in arresting Mr. Kine and carrying him down the steps of the library, which clearly is contradicted by the tape. Officer Wall also remembered some very intricate details about, you know, his mannerisms, about the types of movements that he was making, but on cross-examination, when he was asked whether or not he remembers Mr. Kine stating anything about Nazis or expletive Nazis, that he didn't remember.
And now I understand you're trying to get the DA to actually file perjury charges against the officer who testified at this, which was the first actual trial of someone arrested for a Republican Convention Week protest.
Gideon Oliver, who represented Mr. Kine during his criminal case, is pressing the district attorney's office to file perjury charges against police officer Wall, who also claims to have been the arresting officer for 4 other people and who also was not involved in their arrests. I don't know if this was the first case to go to trial stemming from the RNC, but this is one of 2 jury trials that have resulted, though there have been numerous bench trials, trials before judges that have resulted.
Okay, and Mr. Kine was acquitted. Let's go to the next tape. This is the case of one Alexander Dunlop. This takes place in the East Village, and in this case, it's actual police tape edited by the district attorney's office in a way that leaves out footage that appears to exonerate Mr. Dunlop. What was he charged with exactly?
Mr. Dunlop was accused of riding his bicycle in a reckless fashion into a line of police officers. And as you will see in the tape, he's behaving with an almost Buddha-like calm as he walks his bicycle across the street in one portion of the tape that the DA's office cut out, and then later is standing also in a very placid fashion as he's actually being arrested.
And in fact, Alexander Dunlop was also charged originally with resisting arrest, which this tape would seem to disprove. Okay, let's roll the first of these two tapes pertaining to Alexander Dunlop. Now, on the right, we have the edited version that the DA's office produced. On the left, we have the unedited original. So far, the same. We will see in a minute where the edit comes, so we will know what part is not in the tape that the DA was using. And there's the edit. And now we're going to put the original on a full screen, so we see the part that the DA did not use. There's, I call him Bear Man. Every protest needs a Bear Man. This is not Mr. Dunlop. Every protest needs a Bear Man with a megaphone and a clown nose. But this is just setting the scene. This is the street.
That's Mr. Dunlop.
On the right, all the way on the right, wheeling the bicycle. Little dazed, maybe spacey looking, but not riding it into a line of police officers.
Correct.
And now we're going to roll the other Dunlop tape in just a second. But what did you establish just with that? Because that was a minute of video, and Alexander Dunlop was in it for about 4 seconds.
Well, what was important about that is exculpatory evidence that the district attorney is required to turn over to the defense. The district attorney is required to turn over what's known as Brady material to the defense, anything that could possibly exculpate the defendant. And what's especially problematic about this is that the tape was edited not at the beginning of the tape and not at the end of the tape in a manner that could be accidental, but this is a middle portion of the tape that was cut out, which, you know, unless an amazing confluence of circumstances occurred, would show that it was a purposeful edit.
And so the DA's office says, oh, we made a mistake, it was just an accident, that's why this part of the tape that appears to exonerate him was cut out, and you allege that it was no mistake. Let's look at the other Dunlop video. And in this, again, he's not going to be in it very much, but we're going to see an interesting moment at the end. Again, the edited DA version on the right, the unedited original on the left. These folks are not Dunlop, but this gives you a sense of the scene. This was a corner in the East Village. Now the edit has happened, as you see, so they've gone at the DA, in the DA's version, to people, including Dunlop, sitting already arrested. Meanwhile, this is all taking place, and again, we're not seeing Alexander Dunlop yet. We're seeing some other folks. The videographer establishing the location, 2nd Avenue and 9th Street. That's not Mr. Dunlop. Another person being arrested.
Nice way to hang a bag around somebody's neck as well.
And get ready to look again on the right, I believe, where we're going to see Mr. Dunlop in just a second. There he is, actually. There's the bottom of his bicycle. And there he is, peacefully arrested. No apparent resisting arrest in this tape. And again, Jeffrey Rothman from the National Lawyers Guild. We don't know if he resisted arrest prior to that. He certainly seemed very calm and subdued at that moment.
At that moment, he indeed seemed calm and subdued. And, I mean, even if prior to this he had been in a wild rage, this negates what he is accused of doing, and therefore had to have been turned over to the defense. So the question is did the district attorney engage in misconduct by not turning this over? I mean, forgetting the fact that this does seemingly exculpate him of any activity of resisting arrest.
Do you happen to know how much time elapsed between the first video and the second video?
Between the time that the first video was turned over?
The first video that we saw of him wheeling his bicycle, and the second video in which he was under arrest.
I do not know that time period. No,
now, my producer is telling me he thinks it was about 3 minutes. So in order for the charge against him to have been accurate, in those 3 minutes, he would have had to go from calmly walking his bicycle, as we saw in video 1, to charging a line of police officers with it, resisting arrest, and winding up as we saw him there. It is possible. You can't prove a negative.
It would have been a very dramatic mood swing.
But this video was used to exonerate him, basically, right? Jeff Jarvis, you've been sitting here very patiently. You are here as media man. Right. Because you are a big advocate of grassroots journalism, you are a blogger, you are a vlogger, which, if that's a new word to our audience, that means you use video as a kind of blog. And for this grassroots journalism, as a proponent of grassroots journalism, you must be pretty interested in videos like this.
Oh, it's great. It's really two stories. It's a story of media and journalism. And journalism is not an act of owning the press or being a journalist. Journalism is an act of witnessing news, recording news, distributing news. And now everyone has the power to do that, and this proves that. And part of this is that the journalistic organizations need to pay attention to the people reporting now. And that's part of the story here, is that this was news that happened. The second part, obviously, is this is empowered citizenry. Now, with the power to record these events and to challenge authorities, as has worked so well from Jeffrey and company, that is a new story here. So the New York Times had a story this weekend of Los Alamos dissidents blogging their dissent and getting rid of the director. There are all kinds of stories like that now out. There's a new ethic of transparency. You can be recorded anywhere doing anything, and especially if you're in power, you better watch out.
What was that Los Alamos story? Is that a kind of mob rule, though? Is that a downside of this? If there are a lot of disgruntled employees and they blog all over the place to discredit their boss, and that brings him down?
There's an issue there, but there's an issue for anyone to have to worry about their own credibility and their own trust. Now the issues of journalism really have to be dealt with by citizens. Do I have trust or credibility? If I start lying about people, then I've lost my trust and credibility, same as a journalist.
Of course, we know what happened to Dan Rather from bloggers, at least in part. We know now what's happening in New York City. There are these various cases. And I want to play the third and final scene from these Convention Week videos. This is my favorite one of them all, actually, and this takes place at a protest on the night of August 31st at the World Trade Center site. I want to thank videographer Michael Schiller for this tape. And before we roll this, I want to give you at home a sense of what you're going to see, and particularly what you're going to hear. At the very beginning of this, you'll see a police officer having a conversation with a woman who appears to be an organizer of the protesters, telling her that this large group of demonstrators at the World Trade Center site can walk on the sidewalk together as long as they follow the rules. Get ready to hear him say, listen to me, you have to comply with all the rules when you're walking through the streets, so when there's a red light, you have to stop. And then we're going to see that they're arrested anyway, even though they're quite clearly a peaceful group complying with the rules. Anything else to set this up, Jeffrey?
Well, no, it's the confusing and contradictory messages that were given to the people who were about to march. Yes, you see, at first they said go ahead and march, and then very shortly thereafter, right after they crossed the street,
so let's roll this and listen carefully to this first bit of conversation.
You've been given the warning. You have to comply with, listen to me, are you going to listen or no? You have to comply with the rules when you're walking through the streets. So when there's a red light, you have to stop.
Let's do that anyway. Okay?
They will be arrested. Anyone with media that blocks the street will be arrested.
Okay, so just
Anyone with media who blocks the street will be arrested, he's adding.
That's everyone now, isn't it?
I guess. So he knows that they're being watched. Now, we made an edit here, so this is a few minutes later. You can see the protesters on the sidewalk walking very calmly. No evidence that they're breaking the rules of the road. Another edit that we made. Now listen to the police. Soon they're going to tell the whole crowd that they're under arrest.
Everyone here is under arrest. Stay
everyone here is under arrest. A few police officers were making a lot more noise than all those protesters, at least from that selective cameras.
It's not a great PR moment for the NYPD, is it?
I guess not. Now, how did they go from you can walk as long as you comply with the rules of the road to everyone here is under arrest with a crowd that was at Placid?
Well, this is a pattern that was repeated throughout the week of the Republican National Convention. I mean, the police engaged in mass arrests of people in perhaps a dozen locations throughout the city, if not more, where they would direct the crowd to go into a certain block, and then they would seal both sides of the block, and everybody who was present on that street, whether or not they were a demonstrator or just somebody who was coming out of a store, was arrested, often with the use of orange nets. Here, it's very vivid on the video, where the officer said, go ahead and march. Just follow the traffic laws.
What's great about this, too, is something you mentioned before, Brian, that you, for the first time, you really get a sense from the citizen video of what it's like to be at these demonstrations, a sense that I did not have from all the hours of coverage that were done. This gives you a whole different sense from a human level of what it's like to be there. And that's
right.
news.
That's right. And it was that first snatch of conversation right at the beginning that was used as evidence to have charges dropped against 227 people who took part in that demonstration. Among those arrested in that big crowd, once they ordered the arrest, that first conversation that was deemed to, in effect, give them all permission to stage that march. I should say that we invited the NYPD to provide a response to this. We told them that we were going to do this segment, and we did not hear back from them. But we know that they did go on Pacifica Radio recently to talk about these videotapes, and I want to give you a little bit of the NYPD side. First, they point out that there were basically 0 complaints of brutality that week. So for all of the people who were anticipating something like the Democratic Convention in Chicago in 1968, it didn't happen, and we need to remember that when judging their overall performance. Fair enough?
No, I would say that's not fair at all. There were numerous instances of excessive force used against the protesters. There's people who were thrown to the ground. There's people who were pepper sprayed without any justification whatsoever. Almost everybody who was arrested had these plastic handcuffs put on them in a manner that was far too tight, and with a consistency that would show that it was almost a policy and a practice of the police to purposefully put them on. Some people's hands turned blue and purple. People suffered permanent nerve damage to their hands as a result of this. And so I do not think it is at all fair to state that the NYPD behaved with restraint.
Generally been given a lot of credit for restraint, and those allegations, I guess, have yet to be proven. But the police spokesman on Pacifica also mentioned that the one felony assault that was caught on videotape by a freelance journalist, an actual felony assault, was the assault of a police officer by a protester who allegedly kicked the officer unconscious. And this was witnessed, he said, by National Lawyers Guild observers, or one of them, who never came forward to help or to identify the assailant. If that's true and that person was from your group, what does that do to your group's role as neutral observer?
Well, that's not the case. I mean, the legal observer who was there offered to come forward and tell the district attorney precisely what they saw, which was a lunatic officer who happened to have been in plain clothes with no indicia indicating that he was with the police, I believe drive his scooter into the crowd in a very dangerous fashion, and the result being that that this individual who was accused of the felony and who later pled guilty to a lesser charge, to a misdemeanor, receiving a sentence of time served, was simply defending himself when he responded with physical force.
Have their version and your version of that. Jeff Sharpus, I think we're in this really funny place in media history right now. At once we have consolidation of the old media in fewer and fewer big corporate hands, and decentralization of the media into the hands of these bloggers, again from the Dan Rather story, these vloggers from this story. Is the media centralizing or decentralizing?
It's doing both. I think the centralization, I actually will go against type here and say that I don't have a problem with it because it's dinosaurs gathering around in the cold of the Ice Age coming. The decentralization is what you have to watch out for here. Last week they announced that the podcasters are going to, people who can create their own radio shows, are going to take over a radio station in San Francisco under a large company and be on Sirius Radio. These are important things that are happening here where the citizens' content, what we have to say as citizens, is now seen as having value. New voices, new perspectives, new sources of news and information. That's what you pay attention to. There are now millions of new sources.
And as you know, we podcast the WNYC radio show that I host every morning. And you and I really share a journalism ethic, which is that journalism is not just about me being here on television telling you something kind of from on high, but journalism is a conversation between journalist and audience. And that's why I like to take a lot of phone calls and invite emails. And on this show, in just a minute, we're going to invite you to send us videos that you've made, photos that you made that have meaning about New York. This is a journalism ethic that you and I share. But is it possible in the major national media for this to become a real ethic?
I think so. I think that it really is possible. I think when the people demand it, when there's opportunity. The fact that podcasts became hot made Infinity Radio, the second biggest radio company in America, turn around and say, well, let's take a station in San Francisco that's not doing well, where the programming is dull, and turn it over to the people. I think it couldn't start to happen. There's other questions that come up. Are they going to exploit them and pay them and all kinds of stuff? But I think we'll start to find that people can talk back and forth at a human level and listen. All
right. Blogger Jeff Jarvis, buzzmachine.com. Jeffrey Rothman from the National Lawyers Guild, I really appreciate you being our first ever guests on Brian Lehrer Live. Thank you very much. Now, we would like to air your digital video and digital photographs that show something meaningful about New York. If you have digital stills or camcorder video that you have shot that you think reflects something meaningful about life in New York, send us an email about it. We'll follow up with you, and maybe we'll use it on the air. Just email brian@cuny.tv. And coming up in about 20 minutes, we'll have our first Brian Lehrer Live open phone segment. The question will be, should all of New York's undocumented immigrants be given a chance to stay here legally? Believe it or not, that's expected to be part of a proposal from Senators Edward Kennedy and John McCain soon, and we want to know what you think about the idea. We'll make sure to save some lines for undocumented immigrants yourselves, so you can tell us if you would take the deal that Kennedy and McCain are expected to offer, and so you can tell your fellow viewers some of your immigration stories. So don't call about this yet. Think about it and get ready to call, maybe in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, on the question, should all of New York's illegal immigrants be given a chance to stay here legally? But first, Michael Eric Dyson versus Bill Cosby, the Afrostocracy versus the Ghetocracy, right after this break. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
There is really only one boy. One girl. One tree. One forest. One deep, dancing ocean. One mountain calling. One handful of sand through our fingers. One endless sky overhead. And one simple way to care for it all. Please visit earthshare.org and learn how the world's leading environmental groups are working together under one name, EarthShare. One environment, one simple way to care for it.
Prominent professors, outstanding students, illustrious alumni, all on the Emmy-nominated magazine show about CUNY. Hi, I'm Valerie Vasquez. Join us every week as we bring you stories about the people and programs that make CUNY a place where you study with the best.
Hip-hop intellectual versus anti-hip-hop African-American hero. Afrostocracy versus Ghetocracy. That's the way it breaks down in this new book by University of Pennsylvania professor Michael Eric Dyson, who has been referred to as a hip-hop intellectual. And the book title says a lot. Is Bill Cosby right? or has the black middle class lost its mind? It's published by Basic Civitas Books. This book is timed for the one-year anniversary of the speech that Bill Cosby gave to an NAACP dinner last May, the dinner marking the 50th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision that outlawed segregation in the public schools. Cosby ripped into the values of black inner-city parents. They're wasting Brown because they don't value education. Fathers are absent. Mothers give their kids fake African names like Shaniqua and Shaliqua, he said, that hold them back in life. He even accused them of raising pimps. It was rough and it was intense. And judging from this book, it's still causing intense reactions. And we want your reactions. We want your phone calls on the Cosby speech, especially if you're an African-American New Yorker who has talked about this with your family and friends over the past year. And let us know what you think about how tough Professor Dyson is on Cosby and the class war that he sees within the black community, the Afrostocracy versus the Ghetocracy. Thank you for being on the first ever Brian Lehrer Live. Great to have you.
Well, it's an honor to be here, and thank you so much.
And we'll pick up right where we left off on the radio the other morning.
Absolutely.
Tell people where this phrase, hip-hop intellectual, came from, first of all, referring to you.
Well, I think it was an acknowledgement of my attempt to bridge the gulf between the generations, the so-called civil rights generation, of which I'm not a member because I'm too young. I was born in 1958, therefore I didn't get a chance to march with Martin Luther King Jr. or Fannie Lou Hamer against the vicious forces of white supremacy and social injustice. On the other hand, I'm a bit older than the average hip-hopper, so I'm a betweener, but my bridge is a tongue between the two generations. Excuse me, and I wanted to be able to negotiate civil rights, hip-hop, Marvin Gaye, Tupac Shakur, about whom I've written books. So I wanted to talk about the vital necessity of speaking to young people and using their culture as a basis to raise questions, to challenge them, but to invite them into the larger conversation of social justice and racial transformation in America.
All right. Now, we actually have some clips of Bill Cosby from that speech. They're audio clips, and we'll get to them in just a minute. But how about these words that you've coined? Tell our viewers what you mean by Afrostocracy and Ghetocracy, Ghettoocracy.
Right. Well, aristocracy, black aristocracy, Afrostocracy, a kind of condensation there. So I mean those privileged, gifted, fortunate blacks who have been able to climb by virtue of their hard work, by dint of their incredible talent, up the scale of upward mobility and to being able to achieve professional status. The ghetocracy are those people stuck at the bottom, the working poor, people who get up every day of their lives and go to work and yet can't make it above the poverty level, or those who are underemployed or unemployed, who are segregated in enclaves of civic horror called slums or ghettos. So I wanted to speak about the tension between the Afrostocracy and the Ghetocracy. It's nothing new. Mr. Cosby is a lens onto a larger landscape that provides a convenient metaphor for how black people who have been rich have Aframnesia, black forgetfulness, tending to distance themselves from these people, he said. He was distancing himself from them in a kind of clinical dispassion, as if it wasn't us people who were involved, and that's what I want to draw attention to.
So this is not just about Bill Cosby and his speech. This is about, and we'll play the first clip in just a second here. You're going to hear some laughing and cheering at some things that you may find offensive.
Right.
So this is about a whole class of people.
Oh, absolutely, and it's about class warfare, and it's about an ongoing debate in black America that is at least a century old and perhaps longer.
All right. Clip one of Bill Cosby from this NAACP Brown versus Board of Education anniversary gala a year ago, May 17th. And this first clip has to do with crime. You'll hear the words orange suit, which refers to a prison suit.
I'm talking about these people who cry when their son is standing there in an orange suit. Where were you when he was 2? Where were you when he was 12? Where were you when he was 18? And how come you don't know he had a pistol?
Bill Cosby, what do you think of that clip? If you've never heard it, give us a call. The number is on your screen. Have you talked about this with your friends or family? What do you think about it, hearing it right now? Give us a call as we talk with Michael Eric Dyson, author of Is Bill Cosby Right, or Has the Black Middle Class Lost Its Mind? And how about that clip? Where were you, parents, when he was 2, when he was 12, when he was 18?
Sure, good questions. We want to interrogate black people, poor people, about their role in the lives of their children. Were you giving them values? Were you transmitting visions of successful hard work? Most of them were. People who turn out to be criminals don't often come from homes where people try to teach them how to be criminals. But the economic difficulties, the social struggles, prevent sometimes poor parents from having the flex time that professionals have to pay attention to their children. Not, I'm suggesting that they don't have the chance to teach their children values, because most poor people do an excellent job of it. But criminals come from all classes. Ken Lay, who may be charged in Enron, people who have been charged on Wall Street for bilking people out of billions of dollars. Martha Stewart, God bless her, went to jail. So criminals come from all classes. Why is it that we talk about the poor only?
Can you have it both ways, Professor Dyson? I think you would also argue that disproportionately violent crime comes from poverty.
Oh, absolutely.
And so if social conditions create criminals, then are not the parents, not willful raising of criminals, certainly, but neglect? Are you letting them off too easy by saying, you know, maybe they're single parents and they have a lot of work? Are not the social conditions in the home also a contributor to the preponderance of violent criminals who come from inner city urban areas?
So you've got a big dam, and you've got people down there in the gully trenches putting their fingers in the hole trying to keep it from busting. Do you blame the people down in the trenches trying to stick their fingers in the holes to keep it from going over, or do you blame the larger conditions, the overflow, the vast forces that are pushing the dam forward? I'm saying those poor parents themselves have often been victimized. They often are undereducated. They are often severely assaulted in the dominant culture. They have their fingers in the dam trying to prevent the waters, and we're blaming them as opposed to the conditions that have led to the waters to overflow in the first place. So I'm not exempting poor parents from their moral responsibilities, but where were Paris Hilton's parents? And she had a sex tape that is now selling well, and she has a highly rated television show, and because she has been involved in moral miscreant behavior, some would say sexual perversity, others would say titillating behavior, she is now a celebrity. And I'm asking you, where were her parents in the creation of the moral mindset that allowed her to exploit sexual excess and then transform it into a virtue, where poor black and white people, Latino and red people, are victimized because they're seen to be more morally reprehensible, and yet most of them are morally puritanical in comparison to Paris Hilton?
Do you want to blame both Paris Hilton's parents and some of these criminals' parents, or let them all off the hook?
I'm asking you why we aren't talking about Paris Hilton. We're here talking about poor black people because Mr. Cosby went at them. I wrote a book in response to them. And I'm saying to you, the reason is because we exempt people of privilege and celebrity from serious investigation. We exempt classes of people. If you have the money to cushion the fact that your child got an abortion and moved to a different city, or had a baby out of wedlock and moved away, where poor people are on the front line, they cannot retreat into the womb of protection economically or socially. So I'm suggesting to you it's easier to beat up on poor people than it is to interrogate our own practice.
Let's take our first call, and then we'll play the second clip that we have of Bill Cosby from that speech. That one's going to be on education and the way that people talk English. But our first ever caller on Brian Lehrer Live is Winnie in Jamaica. Hi, Winnie. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, Professor Dyson. I've seen you so many times. I'm really excited to speak with you, and congratulations, Mr. Lehrer, on your new show.
Thanks a lot.
Professor Dyson, I really, you really hit it on the head as far as you cannot blame victims for the overarching problems that they're really succumbing to. You have to look at the overarching social problems. Yes, there are single mothers. Yes, their parents doing crack. Yes, there are kids that are not going to school. But what are the factors that are leading to that? This is not in isolation. And for Bill Cosby to say, these people, regardless of where his upbringing is from, is to negate that there is more than just these people. Not that there's more than just these people, but that there's more than just their actions that are the problem.
Yes, ma'am. No. I think that's very well stated. What you put your finger on is exactly what we're speaking about. It's not that we want to exempt people from moral scrutiny. It's that we want to provide a broader context where we have complex analysis of difficult problems.
Yes.
It's easier to reactionarily, reflexively beat up on the person nearest to you. When you're a poor person, you go home, and when you're a person under pressure, regardless of class, you go home, beat up on the wife, kick the dog, beat the children because they're near to you. Cosby reached out and beat up on the people near to him, and as the caller has said, the larger overarching problems that lead to the difficulties about what you have spoken, about what Mr. Cosby spoke, never get interrogated, never get asked. It's not an either or, it's a both and.
All right, Wendy, thanks a lot for starting us off. We really appreciate it. We'll take more calls in a minute, but let's go to that second Bill Cosby clip. And as I said, he'll talk here about education and the English language.
It's standing on the corner. It can't speak English. It doesn't want to speak English. I can't even talk the way these people talk. Why you ain't where you is, go where? I don't know who these people are. And I blamed the kid until I heard the mother talk. And then I heard the father talk. This is all in the house. Everybody knows it's important to speak English, except these knuckleheads.
Except these knuckleheads. And Michael Eric Dyson, I want to focus, before we even talk about these knuckleheads, the crowd, the reaction. When he said, they say, where you ain't, where you is, or whatever he said, there was laughing, there was cheering. This is a mostly black crowd at an NAACP 50th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education gala. How did that hit you?
You know, there's a high premium and reward on black self-hatred and the titillating prospect of black people undoing themselves and unraveling and celebrating that unraveling. Can you imagine a Jewish person standing up before B'nai B'rith or a Jewish organization, aware, of course, of the internal problems and contradictions and beating up on, you got names like Mayim Bialik, who can't change her name to Missy Bo to become Blossom on television. Can you imagine then that seeping beyond the boundaries of that self-enclosed community, then they would open themselves to anti-Semitic assaults by people who say, we told you these Jews were messed up, and now this Jewish leader has given, Jews, Italians, Poles, it would be very difficult. So now black people celebrate the pathologies and perform the self-destruction. I think what you saw there with that audience is the celebration of Cosby attacking them, and he's referring to the children as it. He's celebrating, and the black people who are there congratulating themselves upon taking seriously the legacy of the Brown versus Board of Education. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. First of all, poor people have not failed. The black middle class has failed these people by getting caught up into materialistic comforts and trinkets as opposed to fighting for justice.
I think when he said it came after a reference to, you want to join the Peace Corps, it's on the corner, it doesn't speak English. So he's talking about some culture, not quite a child is it. But let me ask you about the Jewish analogy.
Right.
Jewish people say, anytime you have 5 Jews in a room, you have 6 opinions.
Gotcha.
And there is a lot of dissent within the Jewish community about Israel,
Yes.
about things like that. And don't we want the Jewish community, the black community, any internal group, to have internal self-criticism?
Oh, absolutely. You said internal self-criticism. Very critical to have internal self-criticism. And it's important at the same time to understand the uses to which your internal self-criticism will be put. If at the height of lynching of black people, a black leader decides to say how reprobate black people are, it tends to give succor and support to the Ku Klux Klan, which seeks to rid black people of the country. I'm saying there are critical times to do so, and there are critical times not to do so.
To do so in private, but
no, not necessarily in private, just in ways that don't lend themselves to the reproduction of the very oppression you're trying to avoid. Listen, I'm for self-criticism. I wrote a book on Martin Luther King Jr. talking about plagiarism and promiscuity.
Yes, you did.
Trust me, you're looking at a brother who has been beat up by black people by saying, traitor, you sold black people out. So I know how to deal with that kind of thing, and I'm willing to put my reputation on the front line to put that forth. But I'm saying something different here. I'm saying that the stakes of black self-preservation have never been higher, and I'm saying that the willing submission to beating up on each other for the sport of a dominant culture is something we must be careful of. And I think Cosby and the audience that night were caught up in that kind of revelry.
Let's take another phone call. This is Sonia in Bed-Stuy. Hey, Sonia, you're on Brian Lehrer Live. Sonia, you still there? Oh, I know why. I pressed the wrong button. Now I think we have Sonia. Are you there?
Hi, I'm there.
Hi.
Hello, how are you, Brian?
Thanks for calling the show. How you doing?
Hi, Michael.
Hey,
I'm calling because I think Bill Cosby's words was a bit harsh, but some of the things he said is true. This country offers free education. Why won't these kids go to school? We are more concerned with our fashion and how we look than our education. White kids go to school with holes in their clothes and their shoes. They don't care. They go and get an education. You know, and we can't blame the parents for everything because you have good, hard-working black parents who try to bring up their kids as best they can, but they go out and learn these bad things from the society. So, I mean, it goes both ways.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
No, I want to say, you know, I'm a professor. I've taught at several universities. Let me tell you, white kids skip school. White kids do everything you blame black kids for. And when you've been exposed to them, you don't have to either romanticize or demonize. You can just equalize and balance your assessment and say, look, all kids are seduced by anti-intellectualism. Black kids' empirical studies have been done to show that black kids are proud of their academic achievement. They're proud when they get recognized for it. They have an equal desire to go to college. And this notion that they act white because they assign a negative value to intellectual endeavor is one study done in 1986. Longitudinal studies and empirical anthropological studies have been done to suggest that that was baloney. That is an urban academic legend. So my point is that black kids are just as aggressive about getting an education. These are stereotypes to suggest that black people have a disinclination in learning and getting educated.
As a group, yes. But I know from my own black friends, I know from being able to take phone calls on my radio show for years, that there are black people who will call up and say, this is a strain in our community. This is not what black people do, but this is a problem in the community, that there is a certain subculture in the schools that says studying is acting white and that actually puts pressure on black kids who do work hard not to. Do you think that doesn't exist?
No. What I'm saying, of course it exists. But first of all, it's been exaggerated. It's been blown out of proportion. It's anecdotal more than empirical. And thirdly, what's interesting about that is that usually the acting white stigma is attached in communities where black students can't have access to AP, advanced placement courses, or things like that. They see the white kids get access to it, they don't. So naturally, you're defensive. When the white kids get it and you can't get it, oh, that's acting white. And let's not forget, there was a time in this country when acting white was trying to suppress black people's possibility from getting an education. Furthermore, white kids are anti-intellectual. The president of the United States is one of the most profoundly anti-intellectual people, and proud of it because he won election by being pitted against the pointy-head intellectual John Kerry, and before that Al Gore, as being somebody who's not a snobby, snooty intellectual. So please spare me the recriminations against black people. The particular strain of anti-intellectualism happens to be acting white, but in Jewish communities and the Italian communities and Latino communities, it takes on different varieties and different expressions.
Tricia in Park Slope, you're on Brian Lehrer Live. Hi.
Hello, are you speaking to me? Oh, okay, that's me.
Yes, is that you, Tricia?
I'm trying to remember what it is that I really wanted to say. But my point is that I think that I totally agree with the professor because I believe that Bill Cosby missed a real important point. First of all, I think that's kind of like black people, the language that he's accusing us of speaking is what I was taught was called colloquialism. You know, people in Appalachia speak a certain language that only they understand. I think, you know, I'm around Bill Cosby's age. I'm a great-grandmother. And I really believe that when Bill Cosby and I were going to school, we were taught the school system was totally different. It's deteriorated beyond recognition to people my age. And children, especially children in ghettos, so-called ghettos, because I think every neighborhood is a ghetto of its own. But, you know, I really believe that it's not that the parents don't try or we don't teach our children. I think, you know, TV and the movies and school, they all perpetuate this non-English English.
So, Tricia, let me ask you, I'm going to throw another Cosby quote at you from the speech. He said, you can't land a plane with why you ain't. You can't be a doctor with that kind of crap coming out of your mouth. Where did these people get the idea that they're moving ahead on this? Is it holding children back to not also teach
Excuse
them
me, but
so-called
he
proper
is
English.
So off base with that, because there are pilots that do. I mean, just to use those examples, there are doctors that speak worse than anybody I know personally.
They certainly
I
write
can't
worse
even
than anybody.
understand what they're saying, and they're born and raised in America. Nevertheless, the way you speak hasn't got a damn, excuse the French, hasn't got anything to do with the way that you learn. I mean, if you can read, you may not speak the way you read. I can read French, but I can't speak French with a French accent, if you know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying, and we got to leave it there.
Pardon?
We got to leave it there, but appreciate your call. Please call us next week. Thank you
Can I
very
respond
much.
to that?
And, you know, and people talk, I think, on this point, people talk one way to their friends, and they talk another way if they're at their job. And, you know, not everybody who talks black vernacular or any kind of vernacular, that's the only way they can talk.
Good God, man, what was Cosby talking like that night? Did you hear the speech? How come you didn't know he was in the prison and the jello and the pudding pop and the thing? I mean, this man speaks Ebonics, look, as a course of both his comedic enterprise and inevitably and unavoidably because of how he speaks. He is an Ebonicist of the first order, and for him to degrade black people for speaking that when he's reaped millions of dollars of benefit off of it. Fat Albert is visual Ebonics turned into a kind of dumb Donald Weird Hair. I'm gonna be doing this. This man has made millions off of it. I think it's hypocritical.
Last thing, Professor Dyson, we're pretty much out of time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
At the practical level,
yes.
What do you tell your kid if your kid starts sloughing off in school, starts getting in with a bad crowd?
Sure.
You don't want to tell your kid, go read this book, do you? Because that's going to let them off the hook, rather than tell them, hey, you better get yourself straight for your own good?
I don't know if you think this book lets them off the hook. This book hopefully is written with a certain kind of passion and eloquence, so the example of the writing itself should lift your vision, should force you to see what the better virtue is in terms of writing. Secondly, I believe in eloquence. Try to practice it myself, try to engage in it on a regular basis, because like Aristotle, I believe that virtue is a habitual practice that is repeated over space and time. So I can talk about Aristotle and Snoop Dogg. I can code switch. I want young people to be able to do that. I challenge them to lift their vision, but at the same time I say you better work harder because you're going to get a less of a chance, and when you step up into the plate, be ready to represent. So you will not find Michael Eric Dyson excusing mediocrity, which is why I'm on George Bush's behind, as well as Shanique was behind as well.
Passionate, yes. Vision, yes. Is Bill Cosby right, or has the black middle class lost its mind? University of Pennsylvania Professor Michael Eric Dyson. Always a pleasure, my friend.
My friend, it's always great to be here, and God bless you, and congratulations to you and Sister New and everybody else here. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much for being with us. And now let's try a little experiment. We will take your calls on the question, should all of New York's illegal immigrants be allowed to stay here legally? 212-251-0801. That's right. Should all of New York's illegal immigrants be allowed to stay here legally? And if you think this is a question from the political fringe, check out this op-ed from a pretty mainstream paper, Sunday's New York Daily News. The title is, New York has 650,000 undocumented immigrants. They should all be legal. And it comes, believe it or not, from a senior fellow at a conservative think tank, the Manhattan Institute. She is Tamar Jacoby, a longtime advocate of both immigration and assimilation. And talk about mainstream politicians. She says Senator John McCain, along with Senator Edward Kennedy, will introduce a bill this month to allow undocumented immigrants to register with the government, pay a fine, and then work while waiting for their green cards. So what do you think of this idea? Call us at 212-251-0801. We will save some of our lines, by the way, for undocumented immigrants yourselves. If you're out there, tell us your story. Why did you come here? Why do you stay? What do you think of New York? And do you like this idea? Would you register with the government, pay a fine for being illegal in the past, submit to a background check, and then apply for a green card? Call us up, and don't worry, we're not forwarding these calls to the INS. We just want your opinion and your story. And what about anyone else? Good idea? Jacoby argues that native-born Americans will also benefit because the undocumented here today are the people who grow our food and build our homes and bus our tables and take care of our children. And she says the alternative, rounding up 11 million illegal immigrants nationwide for deportation, would break up families, would break the economy by costing so much in law enforcement, and deporting workers whose labor is needed here. So What do you think? Give us a call. Should all the illegal immigrants in New York be invited to register with the government, pay a fine, and then get on the road to a green card if they have a job? And if you are an illegal immigrant, would you take the deal? 212-251-0801. We'll take your calls right after this break. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
I hang out with a pretty trashy circle. The circle that helps this circle by recycling trash. We sort glass, plastic, separate cans, stack newspapers and magazines. Now, thanks to us, there are lots of products made from things we've already recycled. This cereal box wants your Sunday paper. These paper clips, in a more daring life, a 56 convertible. The circle works like this. It starts when we recycle trash at home and at work. It's completed when we buy products made from or packaged in recycled materials. How do you know the difference? Check the label for something called post-consumer recycled content. It looks like this. Make a mental note. Then buy the highest percentage of it you can find. You'll save a tree, you'll save energy, and in your own way, you'll help save the world. Complete the circle.
Hello, I'm Lev Sverdov from the City College.
I'm Eugene Chandler from Brooklyn College. We are grateful to be chosen as 2005 Rhodes Scholars.
Before we go off to Oxford University, we want to say thank you.
To our brave parents for bringing us to the United States.
And to CUNY for giving us access to outstanding faculty and a first-rate education.
If you're looking for a great investment and believe that young people deserve educational opportunity,
invest in CUNY.
Now.
For 12 more reasons to invest in CUNY, go to cuny.edu.
All right, now we'll take your calls on the question that we posed before the break. Should all of New York's illegal immigrants be allowed to stay here legally? And we'll save at least some of our lines for undocumented immigrants. We ran so long tonight with our great guests that we'll do this little call-in experiment for a very short period of time. But Henry in Bedford Park in the Bronx. Hi, you're on Brian Lehrer Live.
Hello?
Hi, Henry, you're on the air.
Hello?
Are you an undocumented immigrant?
Yes.
Where are you from?
I'm from Liberia.
And what do you think about New York?
Well, listen, Brian, the problem is it's not about going back. We got nowhere to go, so it don't matter. Well, once we get here, it's over.
Would you take the deal? Would you pay a fine of, I don't know what it's going to be, but let's say it's a couple of $1,000s?
I would sacrifice anything to not go from where I came, so it don't matter.
And submit to a background check and then get on the line for a green card. You do that.
Brian, I've been there 22 years without being arrested one day. That's
how do you, Henry, how do you work, since employers are supposed to check your immigration status when they hire you?
Brian, I'm a very technical person, and I work for less than half the price.
Thank you for your call. And that's one of the reasons for this proposal, is so people like Henry don't have to do the same work for half the price. Robert in Woodrow on Staten Island. Hi, you're on Brian Lehrer Live. Do we have Robert?
Hello?
Hi, Robert. We have a few seconds for you. What's your comment? Robert, you're on the air.
Hello?
Okay. All right. I guess Robert can't hear us. And you know what? We're out of time anyway. Thanks for your phone calls, and thanks for watching the first ever edition of Brian Lehrer Live. Remember, we'll be here live every Wednesday in May and June at 7 o'clock. Next week, our guests include architect Daniel Liebeskind, what's left of his inspiring vision for rebuilding Ground Zero. Meanwhile, we want to know what you thought about the issues we talked about tonight and how we presented them. Send me an email. The address is brian@cuny.tv. And don't forget to join me for the Brian Lehrer Show on the radio. That's every weekday at 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio, 93.9 FM, and AM 820. Tomorrow morning, my guests will include New York Times columnist Bob Herbert. Have a great night. The AMT